Hey Denchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the self-titled debut EP from rising indie pop artist Elohim. 2016 seems to be the year of extra long EPs. Earlier this year we saw Anki's One EP, which had 9 tracks, and then we saw Kashmir's The Lion Across the Field EP with 12. And then of course we can't forget about the Pegboard Nerds Pink Cloud Remixes EP, which was a full 21 tracks long. In the same way, Elohim's debut EP is 10 tracks long, which probably should have been classified as an album, but if she wants to call it an EP, that's cool too. Now, indie pop is kind of a genre that I tend to stay away from just because it's mainly driven by a very central radio appeal. Although the genre is more so liked by outcasts than your kind of standard pop music, indie pop I think is probably one of the most basic genres in music, and it's been very hard for me to get into the genre. You might think that surprising from me, considering I listen to so many indie electronic artists and indie rock artists, but there's some very similar things throughout indie pop as a genre that kind of define it, and that's very bright melodies, higher pitched vocalists that are typically women, sometimes men, and with very subtle electronic undertones that don't really serve to define the artist in any kind of particular way. I found out about this EP because Eden actually suggested that I listen through it because he says he really digs this stuff that this girl is doing, so I figured why not. A couple weeks ago when I first previewed this EP for the first time, I only listened to the first couple tracks and sadly didn't really get to listen to the rest, and today I finally got the chance to listen through the full thing. I'm honestly very disappointed in myself that I didn't listen through this whole thing earlier, because the first couple tracks on this one are probably the most radio friendly on this, and that's probably what pushed me away from listening to the whole thing earlier on. Sadly, and I mean sadly, one of the worst things about this EP is Elohim's voice on this one, which kind of sounds like a fairly generic indie pop vocal, but this is definitely made up for within the production of the EP, which I'm pretty sure was handled by Elohim herself. I think Sensations is probably the only track on this album that I could potentially hear on an indie pop radio station, along with the possibility of She Talks Too Much, the second track on this EP, but more so Sensations because the lyrical themes being primarily sexuality, the vocals and the production style on this all kind of tie into your standard indie pop sound, probably making it for one of my least favorites on the EP, but that doesn't completely ruin the EP either. If you can kind of get past the generic nature of Elohim's voice on this EP, there are some really deep aspects of this EP to get into, especially on terms of lyricism, which has been a key piece of me really getting into indie electronic music more. Of course, her lyrical themes aren't really close to Eden's, but I find myself connecting to these in a whole new way, in certain perspectives that I've never seen before. For example, the theme of anxiety shows up many times in this EP, primarily on the track Xanax, which is one of my favorite cuts on the EP. On the surface, you can hear Elohim singing about the struggles of having anxiety, especially within the first verse, but on a deeper level, we can see Elohim talking about being enslaved to the thing that's supposed to suppress her anxiety, Xanax, where throughout the chorus she just repeats, every day of my life, every day of my life, every day of my life, every day of my life. And some listeners may be a little annoyed at this repetition, but the point of this song really wouldn't have been able to be pushed across any other way. There are a number of interludes on this EP as well, a couple of which I thought were extremely meaningful, especially the first one, Black and Blue, which leads very well into Xanax, where at the end of the interlude it says, "Do you have anxiety? I have anxiety," as well as TC, which seems to have some kind of meaningful phone message from maybe a lover or a family member of Elohim. Now, scrapping the interludes, let's talk about the overall production on this EP. Starting on the track Bridge and the Wall, things start to get really interesting. There almost seems to be hundreds of instruments and percussion flowing out the background and just carefully textured throughout the entire track. Songs like this one actually remind me a little bit more of Jamie XX and tie this EP into a little bit more of an indie electronic sound rather than indie pop. There's a number of awesome bass and guitar riffs on this track that I really liked, probably making for one of my favorites on the EP. Bridge and the Wall isn't even the only track with that meaningful instrumentation either. Coming back on the track Pigments later in the EP, we see an absolutely nuts synth solo followed by an emotional piano riff. Followed by that track comes the song Guts, which is probably one of my other favorites on this EP. A key thing to my music taste in the past couple years has been contrast, and boy oh boy does this song show it off well. Because on one side of this song we've got the kind of standard indie pop vocals, and then on the other side we've got some of the most unique, gritty, and noisy electronic production production that I've heard in the last couple years. And these combined shouldn't really sound good together because they usually don't. But this track somehow manages to pull it off, even with one of the most generic indie pop vocal lines possible. I want to think what happened with this track is that it originally was supposed to be a kind of generic indie pop song, and then the entire instrumental was just scrapped, and Elohim came in and just made a really angry and noisy production. Because that's honestly what it sounds like here, and I really love the result. All That Gold makes a really awesome closer, although it's not one of the most unique on the EP. It's a solid electronic tune with some trap undertones and some auto-tune vocals by Elohim, and then the track leaves off with some really dark, atmospheric electronic sounds, making for one of the better instrumental portions of this EP. Overall, I am very happy with the direction that this EP went, and definitely turned me on to listening to more indie pop. I'm feeling a strong 7.5 out of 10 on this EP. If you have listened to this EP, make sure to let me know what you think down in the comments section below. If you haven't, I have the Spotify link in the description so you can go and listen to it yourself. And I hope you guys do check this one out because Elohim is a rising artist that definitely deserves some more limelight. This is an artist that I can really see branching into a lot of different directions and really becoming a great in both electronic music and indie pop. And I think it's best to hop on this one before she gets absolutely huge. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll see you later. Peace.